As I sat in the front seat of the van, it felt like my entire world was falling apart. My thoughts were racing, overwhelmed by the mess I had found myself in. Those little red flags that had been flashing in my mind all week turned out to be right after all, but I had brushed them off as nothing. Everything started to feel wrong last Tuesday night when Isla mentioned she'd seen a doctor for a yeast infection. The doctor prescribed her medication and told her to avoid any physical contact for at least a week. Something about the way she said it didn't sit well with me. Isla hadn't had a yeast infection in years, and she knew how to avoid them. That was my first clue that something was off, but I tried to ignore it. The signs kept piling up. She had acted strangely that Tuesday, which also happened to be the day she spent with him. During dinner, her mood was distant, like she was lost in her own thoughts. That night, after she disappeared into the bedroom, I stayed up watching TV for a while before finally joining her in bed. When I walked in, she wasn't asleep, but the coldness between us was undeniable. I crawled into bed, wished her good night with the usual good night, lover. But she just turned off the lights without saying a word. That whole week, her cold and distant behavior left me confused and frustrated. I tried talking to her several times, trying to figure out what was wrong, but she dodged every question. She wasn't giving me any straight answers, so I assumed it was the yeast infection making her irritable, especially since it was around the time of her cycle. Thursday morning, just before lunch, I decided to call her to see if she wanted to meet for a meal like we used to. There was no answer either at home or on her cell phone. That wasn't like her. Normally, she'd have her phone glued to her. I called again, and this time, those alarm bells in my head were deafening. Something was very wrong. I decided it was time to address whatever was bothering her. I had even started planning a weekend getaway, thinking maybe some quality time together could help us open up and have the serious conversation we needed to save our marriage. I was even ready to confess my past mistake and recommit to our marriage, hoping it would bring us closer. But before I had the chance, Isla hit me with a bombshell. She knew about my affair with Saren and had been holding it over me, waiting to strike. Instead of calmly talking to me about it, she decided to get even in the worst way possible, by having an affair of her own. That's why she had been so distant, why she'd been avoiding intimacy. She wanted to punish me. Sitting in the van, I kept replaying everything in my head. It all started with my screw-up. One night of weakness with another woman, and everything spiraled out of control. Isla found out through an email from Saren, but instead of confronting me, she chose revenge. She could have come to me, and I would have owned up to everything. I could have explained how sick with guilt I felt when I came back from that business trip. I had wanted to tell her right then, but I held back, thinking it would cause her unnecessary pain. I had hoped it would all blow over, that Saren would forget, and that Isla would never need to know. But now I was paying the price for keeping it from her. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, and it seemed hopeless. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became Isla had gone way too far. My affair wasn't meant to hurt her. I didn't plan it, and I regretted it immediately. But what she did, it was deliberate. She wanted to inflict maximum pain. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about destroying me. Maybe she was even looking for an excuse to end our marriage and be with someone else. She talked about how thrilling it was to be with someone new, blaming me for her infidelity as if it were all my fault. Sure, I messed up, but her response was on a whole different level. I couldn't wrap my head around why she kept up the affair, even after she had supposedly evened the score. Why didn't she stop? Why did she feel the need to drag me into it, to rub her betrayal in my face? Just telling me about it would have been punishment enough. But she wasn't satisfied with that. She wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel small. I couldn't shake the feeling that her actions over the past week had done far more damage to our marriage than my one mistake ever could. As I sat there, the weight of it all pressed down on me. Isla's revenge had gone beyond anything I could have imagined. Even after her first fling with him, we could have still worked things out, but she had taken it too far. So, I reached for a pen and paper from the glove compartment and scribbled a note. "Don't come home. We're through. Your ex-husband." Writing those words felt surreal, like I was ending my life as I knew it. Could I really walk away from the woman I had once loved so much? Did she still love me? Or was this all part of some sick game? I walked back into the bar and handed the note, along with a $20 bill, to the bartender. Give this to Isla when she comes back, all right? The bartender gave me a look, like he knew exactly what was going on without even reading the note. He nodded and promised to pass it along. I stumbled back to the van, feeling crushed under the weight of everything. Tears filled my eyes, my throat was dry, and I could barely stand. Driving away from that bar felt like I was driving away from my entire life. Part of me wanted to turn around and confront her, to demand answers. But my pride wouldn't let me. What was done was done. My mind was a mess as I pulled into the driveway. A part of me was still holding on to the past, to our life together, but another part of me was already planning for the future. How would I protect myself now? What would the divorce look like? Living arrangements? My instinct for self-preservation kicked in. I had to protect myself physically and legally. First step, secure the house. I grabbed the phone book and found a 24-hour locksmith. When I called, I told him I needed all the locks changed immediately. It was going to cost me extra for the late-night service, but I didn't care. I agreed, and he promised to be there within an hour. While I waited, I packed up Isla's things. She only had the clothes on her back, so I grabbed 2 large suitcases and started packing the rest of her stuff. I loaded the bags into the van she usually drove, parked it by the curb, left the keys on the front seat, and kept the garage door opener. The locksmith arrived quickly and got to work changing all the locks. As he worked, I couldn't help but think about how everything had come to this. I never imagined I'd be here, locking my wife out of our home. But here I was. I told the locksmith, "That's fine. Just let me know if you need anything." As he worked, I pulled out my phone and checked my emails. There they were, the messages from Saren, including one from Isla pretending to be me, telling Saren to stay away. Saren hadn't responded to that email, and it looked like things with her were officially over. But as I stared at the screen, I kept wondering why Isla hadn't come to me directly about Saren. Why had she chosen this path of revenge instead? Was something else deeply wrong in our marriage that she hadn't spoken about? Was this how she wanted to settle everything, in one explosive act of vengeance? The phone rang, and I knew it was Isla. I let it go to voicemail. With the speaker on, I listened to her trembling voice, almost pleading. "Oh, Avilio, please pick up. We need to talk. Please don't end our marriage like this. Talk to me, Avilio, please." She sounded on the verge of tears, but I stayed silent. The call ended. It seemed like now that I had taken the first step, she suddenly wanted to reconcile. Maybe she thought my guilt would let her walk all over me. She was wrong. I sat down at the computer and logged into our joint bank accounts. Without hesitation, I transferred all the funds into an account solely in my name. Then I called the credit card company and reported the cards as stolen. When asked if I wanted new ones issued, I said I'd deal with that later. As I finished up, the locksmith handed me the new keys. It was done. Isla wouldn't be able to get back into the house without my permission. While I was still at the computer, the phone rang again. It was Isla, more desperate this time, practically begging for a conversation. I ignored it and started typing up a message to leave for her. It was blunt and final. "Isla, do not ring the doorbell or knock. I will not answer. I packed 2 suitcases with your clothes. They're in the van parked at the curb. Take the van and leave. Once you find a place to live, send me the address, and I'll send the rest of your things. You said we might go our separate ways several times tonight, and you were right. You've chosen your path, so now you can walk it alone. I'll find my own way. Goodbye, your ex-husband." After tweaking a few lines, I printed it out and taped it to the front door. I knew she'd try to come back and confront me in person, but that wasn't going to happen. I walked around the house, double-checking all the windows and doors to make sure they were locked tight. I even disconnected the doorbell to avoid hearing it ring through the night. Feeling a little more secure, I made my way to the den and poured myself a glass of Jack Patrick's. I tried to relax, but as soon as I took a long sip, my hands started shaking so badly that I had to put the glass down. Suddenly, the weight of it all hit me like a freight train. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. It was like I had been living in a nightmare, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wake up. This was my reality now. That's when I remembered the envelope in my pocket and the wet underwear. I had assumed the envelope was a Dear John letter, but when I opened it, I found a dozen explicit photos of Isla. No letter, just pictures. And it was clear from the angles and content that her lover had been the one directing them. She was following his every command, submitting completely. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was her final act of humiliation. If I didn't end our marriage now, I knew this shame would cling to me forever. Those photos, along with the underwear, became irrefutable proof of her infidelity. They could be useful if things got ugly during the divorce. I put them all in a Ziploc bag and locked them in a safe. Then, I went back to the computer, accessed the emails from Saren and Isla, and methodically deleted them all. After thinking it over, I decided to send a message to Saren, explaining that the last email she received wasn't from me but from Isla. I laid out the whole situation, letting her know that I planned to file for divorce on Monday. I also thanked her for the companionship we'd shared, telling her to reach out if she was ever in town. Lastly, I asked her to deny everything if Isla ever tried to drag her into this mess. After sending the email, I deleted it immediately. At this point, Saren had two choices. She could back me up and stay out of it, or she could side with Isla and turn against me. Either way, I felt like it was worth the risk to see where her loyalties lay. With nothing left to do, I finished my whiskey, took a long shower, and went to bed. Just as I started to relax, there was loud pounding on the front door. I knew it was Isla before I even checked. Her voice followed, muffled but frantic, begging me to let her in, pleading for a conversation. The knocking went on for a good 15 minutes before it finally stopped. I stayed in bed, all the lights off, listening as the house grew quiet again. Then, I heard her car start and drive away. I peeked out the window and saw that the van was gone. I had no idea where she went, and honestly, I didn't care. Sleep never came that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the passionate nights Isla and I had spent together in this room. Now it felt empty, hollow. Sunday morning crept in, and I felt even more drained than I had the night before. The stress was eating away at me, wearing me down. Cooking breakfast seemed pointless, so I got dressed and headed to IHOP. But as I opened the front door, I noticed Isla had written a message on the note I left. Her handwriting was shaky, desperate. "Please, Avilio, don't do this to us. Don't end our marriage like this. I still love you and want to remain your wife. We need to sit down and talk this through. Please call me your loving wife, Isla." For a split second, I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. But my wounded pride, my bruised ego, wouldn't let them fall. That small voice inside me kept reminding me of all the hurt, the unanswered questions, and the spiteful things she'd done. There was too much anger and bitterness between us now. That voice was right. This wasn't something I could just forgive and forget. My emotions often swung between extremes because, despite everything, I still had deep feelings for Isla. But no matter how much I loved her, there was no escaping the truth. She hadn't just been trying to get even. She had taken things to an entirely new level, and I was starting to see a side of her I had never known existed. As I read her note again, something glaring stood out. There wasn't a single word of apology. "No, I'm sorry." It struck me that she hadn't apologized in the voicemails she left either. Why not? If she really wanted to fix our marriage, why wouldn't she at least pretend to feel remorse? It was as if apologizing was beneath her. I couldn't help but wonder if something had happened last week that pushed her over the edge. Maybe her revenge affair had originally been about getting back at me, but something else had fueled her actions. What was it? I couldn't figure it out right away, and I realized I'd need a lot more time to piece it together. Breakfast was a welcome distraction. I was starving, and the food helped settle my nerves. As I flipped through the morning paper, I read the usual grim headlines. Chaos in the Middle East, endless cycles of violence and retaliation. It suddenly hit me. Why hadn't Isla tried to make peace between us before escalating things? Did she feel her love for me was so fragile that my one mistake deserved such brutal retaliation? The woman at the register smiled warmly as she handed me my change. "Have a great day, sir," she said. I couldn't help but wonder if it would be a good day or just the start of more chaos. Only time would tell. The drive home was smoother now that my hunger was gone, and my mind started turning to the practical side of things. What about the divorce? Should I go ahead and start the process, or wait a little longer? As I turned onto my street, I saw Isla's van parked in front of our house. My gut instinct kicked in. This wasn't the time for a face-to-face confrontation. I still hadn't sorted out all my feelings, and I wasn't ready to engage with her. So, I turned the car around and drove away, figuring she could wait in that van as long as she wanted. She had made me wait at that bar yesterday. Now, she could experience the same frustration. I headed to the gym, hoping a hard workout would help clear my mind. After all, I needed a break from this mess, even if just for a couple of hours. At the gym, I ran into Henry Kensington, an old college friend who had gone through a divorce recently. I asked him about the process, how to file, what mistakes to avoid, and Henry was more than happy to share his experience. By the end of our conversation, he gave me his divorce attorney's contact info. That gave me a clear path forward. I planned to call the attorney the next day and get the paperwork started. It felt like I was finally taking control of the situation. After a light lunch, I drove back home, relieved to see that Isla's van was gone. I sighed as I pulled into the garage and closed the door behind me. Inside, everything seemed normal, until I spotted another note from Isla. More pleading for a conversation, but still no apology. No acknowledgement of her betrayal. I locked the door behind me, took a warm shower, popped a couple of Excedrin PM, and headed to bed. I needed rest, both physically and mentally, to face whatever the next week would bring. Surprisingly, I slept deeply that night. When I woke up, I felt refreshed. As I got ready for work, I noticed the message light blinking on the phone. I had forgotten to check it the night before. Sure enough, there were 2 more messages from Isla, once again asking for us to meet and talk. And again, no apology, no remorse. That's when it dawned on me. She was holding back any apology to keep the guilt squarely on my shoulders. She wanted me to feel like this was all my fault. It was devastating to realize how much our once happy marriage had devolved into a blame game. At the office, I informed my receptionist, Hannah, and my secretary, Victoria, that I wasn't taking any calls from Isla, and that if she showed up, I didn't want to see her. They gave me curious looks, but I didn't bother explaining. Let them talk. Soon, the divorce would be public knowledge anyway. At 10 o'clock, I called the divorce attorney Henry had recommended, Charles Carrington, and set up a meeting for 2 o'clock that afternoon. The rest of the morning dragged by as I worked through my usual tasks, skipping lunch to stay focused. At 1:30, I let Victoria know I was leaving for the day and asked her to contact me on my cell in case of an emergency. Before I could leave, she mentioned that Isla had called 4 times that morning. I didn't respond and just headed for the elevator. The meeting with Charles Carrington went smoothly. He started by outlining his fees, and we quickly moved into the details of my case. I handed over the explicit photos and the stained underwear, clear evidence of Isla's infidelity. I didn't explain how I came to have them, just that Isla knew I had them. Charles looked curious but didn't push for more details. With the photos and my brief account of Isla's meetings with her lover, he had more than enough to file for divorce based on her adultery. I made no mention of my affair with Saren. I figured if Isla brought it up, I'd deny it. If Saren stood by me and denied it too, it would be Isla's word against ours. I was still holding out hope that Saren would side with me. I also asked Charles to file for a restraining order to prevent Isla from contacting me, and he agreed. He promised all the paperwork would be ready by the next afternoon. As I left Charles's office, I felt a renewed sense of control. The necessary steps were in motion, and I finally had a plan. On a whim, I decided to swing by the office to pick up a couple of reports I'd need for the next day. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Isla's van leaving. She hadn't noticed me. Back inside the office, Victoria looked surprised to see me. I didn't offer any explanation and let her wonder. While packing the reports into my briefcase, Victoria handed me an envelope, saying Isla had dropped it off for me. I slipped the envelope into my briefcase without opening it, certain Victoria was dying of curiosity. She'd have to stay in the dark for now. Before leaving the office, I decided to check my emails one last time. Among them was a message from Saren. I clicked it open and read, "Hello, Avilio. I was really surprised to hear from you after that harsh email I got 2 weeks ago. It shocked and hurt me deeply. Now that I know it wasn't from you, I feel relieved. I'm sorry to hear about the trouble between you and your wife that seems to have started because of me. It's unfortunate that your wife is so vengeful. I know you will do what's best for you. As for our affair, it's a secret I will never tell anyone. You can trust me on that. If I'm ever in town, I'll call you and we can catch up. Good luck, your friend, Saren." This was the reassurance I needed. With Saren's support, I now felt confident in countering any accusations Isla might throw my way during the divorce. I quickly replied, thanking Saren for her understanding and saying I hope to see her again sometime soon. After sending the response, I immediately deleted both emails. In the parking lot, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the envelope Isla had left for me at the office. This letter was different from her previous ones. It wasn't a plea, it was a threat. It read,
Evelio,
"This is your last chance. I've tried to get you to call me and talk this out over the past 2 days. You keep ignoring my calls and throwing me out of our house. You can either call me on my cell phone and arrange a meeting, or you will be served with divorce papers this week. There won't be another chance if you don't call me today. Your wife, Isla." Instead of feeling upset or cornered, I found myself smiling. Isla had switched from begging to making threats, but it was laughable. She was trying to claim some sort of moral high ground, but her threat of divorce was meaningless, given that I had already signed my note as her ex-husband. My intentions should have been crystal clear. Driving home, I mulled over my options. I could ignore her letter entirely since the divorce process was already in motion. She was locked out of the house and I had the upper hand. Or I could agree to meet her, bring the divorce papers, and serve them to her in person, ending this face-to-face. When I arrived home, Isla's van was nowhere in sight, which was a good sign. I stepped inside and saw that nothing had been disturbed. No sign of forced entry. She hadn't gone as far as getting a locksmith to break in. The message light on the phone blinked. I pressed play and heard her voice again, this time terse and to the point. "Avilio, I left a note at your office today. I hope you've read it. If I don't get a call from you tonight, I'll have no choice but to see a divorce lawyer." Again, it was a thinly veiled threat, but I felt like I held all the cards now. I decided it would be best to meet her face-to-face and serve her with the divorce papers. But first, I wanted to have dinner and let her stew a little longer. It was nearing 8 o'clock when I finally called her. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. "Hello, this is Isla," she answered. "Hi, Isla. It's Avilio," I replied. There was a pause before she responded, her tone laced with sarcasm. "I wasn't sure you'd call. Did you get my message?" "I did," I said calmly. "You've made it clear you want to talk. But is there really anything left to say? I want to hear you say it in person, that it's over," Isla insisted. "No more notes, no more cold shoulders. We were once passionate lovers, Avilio." "All right," I agreed, keeping my tone measured. "Let's meet for dinner at Mario's tomorrow night at 6:30. She accepted without hesitation. But before hanging up, she said, "I still love you, Avilio." Her words lingered in the air, but I didn't reciprocate. As much as part of me had once cared for her, it was time to end this chapter. After the call, I poured myself a drink and sat in the den, listening to some smooth jazz as I carefully planned out the next day. I needed to mentally prepare for this final confrontation, to make sure I delivered the divorce papers calmly and decisively. By the time I finished my drink, I had a solid plan in place. Surprisingly, I slept well that night. The next morning at work was hectic, which kept my mind occupied. I made a quick call to Charles Carrington's office to confirm the divorce papers would be ready for pickup later that afternoon. They assured me everything would be in order by 4:30. I arrived at Charles's office just before 5 o'clock, and he went over the documents in detail. He explained that the final divorce would take at least 3 months to finalize, assuming both parties agreed and the papers were filed with the court. After nearly 45 minutes of explanation, I left his office feeling more prepared for what was to come. It was close to 6 o'clock by the time I headed to Mario's. The drive only took about 15 minutes, and I arrived right on time for our 6:30 meeting. The hostess greeted me warmly, and my ego wanted to believe she was impressed by my presence. I smiled back and asked if she had seated Isla Montague. Her smile faltered a little, but she motioned for me to follow her. My first sight of Isla was as we approached the table. She looked the same as she always did, well put together with that familiar pout on her face. "Hello, Isla." I greeted her as I took a seat across from her. "Hello, Avilio," she replied with a coy smile. "Don't I get a kiss tonight?" Recalling her manipulative words from our encounter at the bar, I coolly replied, "That hasn't been decided yet." My response clearly caught her off guard. She had likely expected her charm to win me over, but now she had to rethink her strategy. The waitress came by and we ordered drinks, Isla a white wine, and I a double JD on the rocks. As soon as the waitress left, Isla jumped straight into the conversation, likely wanting to stay on the offensive. "I want you to know, Avilio, this isn't how I wanted our problems to end. You know what started all of this? I was just trying to restore balance so we could rebuild our marriage," she said, her voice calm, almost emotionless. Her words were deliberate, setting the stage for whatever she had planned next. The waitress brought our drinks, and we both took a deep sip. Then, with her eyes locked onto mine, Isla continued, "I hate being painted as the villain here. I acted out of hurt and frustration because of your affair with Saren. This mess is your fault." Her gaze sharpened, trying to pin the blame squarely on me while completely ignoring her own role in the disaster. The waitress returned, asking if we were ready to order. I requested some appetizers and another round of drinks. Isla sat quietly, expecting me to apologize or at least acknowledge her accusations, but I stayed silent, finishing my drink without breaking eye contact. After a long pause, I finally spoke. "So, it's all my fault? You've done nothing wrong," I asked firmly, refusing to give an inch. "Yes, Avilio, it's entirely your fault. You kept your affair hidden from me, and I'm sure you plan to keep seeing her," she shot back, her voice laced with venom. "I wanted you to feel what I felt, to show you that two can play at this game. How does it feel now?" Our appetizers and drinks arrived, and I motioned for the waitress to leave us undisturbed for a while. I needed uninterrupted time to get everything off my chest. I took a breath, steadying myself. "First of all, Isla, this whole situation makes me sick. Yes, I had an affair with Saren at the resort. I'm not going to deny it, but I didn't start it, and I would have told you everything eventually. Now, though, it's too late for that." Isla opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off sharply. "If you interrupt me again, I'll leave you sitting here alone." My tone left no room for argument. She seemed taken aback, and I continued. "It's too late because your reaction was extreme, vindictive, and unnecessary. After you found out about Saren, you could have confronted me. I would have faced your anger and repented. But instead, you chose revenge, a cold, calculated retaliation. You decided to cheat, and you let it go on for days. You could have come clean to me during any of those nights, and we could have dealt with it together. But you didn't." I leaned forward slightly, my voice low but steady. "Had you confronted me, I might have been the remorseful husband you expected. I might have even been able to forgive you for your own affair. But instead, you went above and beyond. You didn't just match my mistake. You bragged about it. 13 times in 4 days, wasn't it? Why 13? Why did you feel the need to surpass the number of times Saren and I were together?" She looked like she wanted to respond, but I raised my hand. "Not now, Isla. Let me finish. You'll get your chance." I pressed on. "This wasn't just about balancing the scales, Isla. You went beyond that. I could have understood you wanting to get even, but what I can't understand is why you felt the need to take it further. After the 7th time or the 4th day, why didn't you stop? Why did you drag me to that club on Saturday night, making me witness your infidelity firsthand? Isla's face was expressionless, like she had practiced how to maintain her poker face. But I wasn't done. You hinted that night that we might not leave the club together, that maybe we should go our separate ways. That was when I realized you had no intention of stopping. You weren't just getting back at me. You wanted to destroy me. I took a deep breath, my tone becoming slower and more deliberate. I still don't understand why you felt the need to push things so far. Why bring me to witness your affair? Why humiliate me like that? The photographs, the damp underwear. I never saw this side of you during our 4 years of marriage. You were always loving and caring. But this is something darker. I could see her shifting in her seat now, uncomfortable under the weight of my words. But she said nothing, her face still betraying little. You told Patrick that the affair would only last 4 days, that you wouldn't see him again after that. So why the 5th day? Why bring me into it? Why did you feel that pushing things even further was necessary for your revenge? I paused, waiting for her response. She remained motionless, her expression as cold as ever. If you're wondering why I left the club after you went off with Patrick, it's because I couldn't understand why such profound humiliation was needed. It wasn't about evening the score anymore. It felt like I didn't know you at all, and that scared me. Finally, Isla's composure cracked. Her face softened, showing vulnerability for the first time. She licked her lips nervously, as if preparing to explain herself. I think I understand what you're doing here, Evelio. You're trying to shift the blame onto me for the collapse of our marriage. I won't let that happen. You broke your vows first, and now you have to live with the consequences. I shook my head. I'm not trying to shift blame, Isla. I'm asking you one thing. Why the 5th day? Why did you take it that far? I just want an explanation. For the first time, I softened my voice, hoping she would finally drop her defenses and tell me the truth. There was a long pause as she mulled over my words. Then, in a quieter tone, she said, "After you confessed, I called my mother and told her everything." Her words were calculated, setting the stage for what came next. The waitress returned with our drinks, and we both took a sip before Isla fixed her gaze on me again and continued. My mother said I was right to seek retribution, but that simply getting even wasn't enough. According to her, I needed to teach you a serious lesson. It hit me hard, Matilda. Of course, her mother had always been a problem, always a negative force in our lives. Suddenly, everything made sense. Matilda, Isla's mother, had been the mastermind behind the 5th day of infidelity. A year and a half ago, Melanie and I had a major falling out, one that I thought had been resolved by moving 250 miles away from her. But no distance was ever enough. Melanie was never welcome in our home. Her constant negativity and harsh criticisms made it unbearable whenever she visited. She had pushed Isla's father to the brink as well, driving him away, leading to their divorce. 2 years ago, during a visit to our home, Matilda's complaints reached a boiling point, and I had finally had enough. I let her have it, told her she was insufferable, and made it clear she wasn't welcome in our house ever again. Isla had been upset by the confrontation but still chose to stand by me. Melanie left the next day and never returned. And now, sitting here, I realized that the 5th day of revenge wasn't even Isla's idea. It was Matilda's influence. It explained everything. Matilda's bitterness had seeped into Isla, and she had followed her mother's advice to the letter. The realization made my stomach churn. Isla continued, unaware of my internal revelations. Mother said all men are cheating, lying lowlives. She reminded me of how my father left her and warned me that you'd probably do the same thing in a few years. She paused, watching my reaction as if expecting me to protest. But I didn't. I was too busy connecting the dots. Isla explained how Melanie had pushed her to continue the affair with Patrick for an extra day, just to drive the lesson home. Melanie had even suggested showing me those incriminating photos Patrick had taken, designed to cut me to the core. As Isla recounted her mother's detailed plan for my public humiliation, it became clear that Melanie had planted this poisonous seed. But as much as she wanted to shift the blame, I wasn't buying it. Isla leaned back, clearly believing she had given me the full explanation. But in my eyes, this was just another attempt to dodge responsibility, to hide behind her mother's influence. Isla wasn't a child. She was a grown woman, my wife, and she had chosen to follow through with this cruel, degrading scheme. She had agency. She had control over her actions, and she had decided to go through with it. So, it's all Matilda's fault for the 4th and 5th days? You didn't want to continue with Patrick, but your mother pushed you to. I asked, my voice calm but dripping with skepticism. Isla nodded, eager to shift the blame. My frustration grew with every word she spoke. She was trying to absolve herself from responsibility, pretending that her mother had forced her hand. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. I think you're lying, Isla, I said, my voice rising just enough to draw the attention of nearby diners. Her face reddened with embarrassment as she tried to respond, but I cut her off. Remember, it was you who dragged me to that bar. It was you who humiliated me publicly. And it was you who waved those photos in my face, taunting me. You might want to blame Matilda, but I was there. I heard your words. The tone in your voice, the way you belittled me. That wasn't your mother. That was you. You enjoyed it. You wanted to punish me. You wanted to make me suffer. And you succeeded. I could see her squirm in her seat, but I wasn't finished. Maybe Melanie suggested it, but when it came to executing the plan, it was all you. Your cruelty, your desire to rub my face in your betrayal. That was your doing, Isla, not hers. That's why it's over between us. I paused to let my words sink in, watching her poker face start to crack. You've shown no remorse, no regret. You're a hypocrite. And now you want to pretend like this was all someone else's idea. But the truth is, you wanted it. You wanted to hurt me. You wanted me to feel powerless. Well, I've had enough. Isla's face hardened, and her voice came out sharp, full of venom. You think you know me, Avilio, but you're wrong. Now that I've been with another man, Patrick won't be the only one sharing my bed. I was ready for this. Without a word, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the divorce papers. Her eyes widened when she saw them. I'm done listening to your excuses, Isla, I said, placing the papers on the table. Here are the divorce papers. You're free to be with anyone you want now. There's also a restraining order included. If you try to contact me in any way, I'll have you arrested. I stood up, ready to leave. Isla sat there, speechless, staring at the papers. One last thing, I said, pointing to the envelope. There's a pre-addressed envelope in there. Once you find a new place to live, send me your address. The movers will come this weekend to pack up your remaining belongings. They'll be held in storage until you let me know where to send them. I left two $20 bills on the table and turned to leave. As I walked away, I heard her shout, "You damn bastard! I'll show you who walks out on whom." Every head in the restaurant turned to look at her, but I just smiled, turned back, and mouthed the word salt before walking out. I had read somewhere that to know what your wife will be like in 25 years, you should look at her mother today. A wry smile crept across my face. Better to learn now than later. Like mother, like daughter. The divorce went relatively smoothly, except for one major outburst in court. When the judge questioned Saren about our supposed affair, she denied it convincingly, just as she had promised. Isla lost it, nearly getting held in contempt. That was the last time I saw her. It's been almost 3 years since the divorce, and I haven't married again. I enjoy the company of different women, but whenever a relationship starts to feel serious, I make a point to meet their mothers. After a few dinners with mother and daughter, I usually decide staying single is the better option. Wherever you are, Isla, thanks for the valuable lesson. Thanks for watching. What would you do if you caught your spouse cheating? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories of betrayal and revenge.